Thank you for being with us here today, Paul. This is an exciting day. This is the first episode of the UrbanLogiq podcast. You're our inaugural guest.
Well, I'm very pleased to be your inaugural guest. That's fabulous.
You are a very appropriate guest. We're so excited to have you on board. For those listening, Paul Lalonde is joining UrbanLogiq as a strategic advisor. And you've had a tremendous career. You're a tech powerhouse, and I think that's saying it very, very lightly. You have worked at some of the most influential tech companies in the world, including Intel, Microsoft, Google, and most recently, NVIDIA. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your career journey, some of the projects that you worked on, just to give the audience some context?
Yeah, my background is in computer graphics. So I started my career long ago in the games industry, building graphics engines, and worked my way through electronic arts for many years. It was a really exciting time to be working in that space. GPUs were just starting to happen, just being invented using the technologies we were building in the game side and cooperating very closely with the developers of the GPUs at that time. That eventually moved on to doing a little startup, Neoptica, with some friends down in the Bay Area that was acquired by Intel and had me then working very closely. I wound up as the chief software architect. Gave me a lot of exposure to how GPUs were structured, built, and moved forward. From there, I went off to work in artificial reality, working on HoloLens at Microsoft for a bit, working at Google on virtual reality headsets, and eventually setting back a little closer to games again with game streaming, where at NVIDIA I led architecture for GeForce Now, which is NVIDIA's game streaming project. And that had broad purview over everything from how we deploy data centers to what changes we needed to GPUs to make the product efficient, to data analytics pipelines that we're using to understand how our users are actually seeing the game experience. It was a very exciting project to work on and to bring to where it is today, where it's very usable, very playable for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you've worked on some amazing projects as you've just described. And on LinkedIn, I think your name or your title right now is Retired Electron Pusher. Mm-hmm. So I want to know, what's bringing you out of retirement? How did you come to sit here with me today to join UrbanLogiq as a strategic advisor?
I mean, it's a bit of a story. I met Max online, actually on Twitter, probably close to 10 years ago.
And for context, Max is our Chief Technology Officer.
Yeah, and it was one of those strange conversations about software build systems where I described something that I'd done at a previous job. He says, wow, that really resembles what we're doing today at EA. And he had turned out to have stepped into the management role in the team that I'd left there behind some years before to go off to a startup.
Small world.
Very small world syndrome. And a few years later, he got in touch with me because he was doing this UrbanLogiq thing and how interesting it was. We were very much in alignment on the vision of how to make government better through technology, and that led to an introduction to Mark, and that in itself turned into a lot of interest for me with the mission and with understanding how to use traditional software technology coupled with modern AI technology to get really good results in the space. But the strength of the mission is the thing that really brought me on board, is to understand the promise of doing technology well by having strong technologists with strong domain experts. That's the fundamental, is that both those channels of strength to bring that mission forward.
Yeah, and for those listening that maybe aren't familiar with our mission, UrbanLogiq is a very mission-driven company. I think that drives a lot of the people that work here. It certainly drives me to be part of this company. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring the technology that's available in the private sector into the hands of public servants, right? We talk about services and these outcomes that we want to see in our communities. And at the end of the day, governments are making billion-dollar decisions that affect the quality of life for generations, and they're doing it with very old technology. Data silos is a really, really big problem. So at UrbanLogiq, we have a platform and we're trying to break down those data silos, bring the data sources together across departments, across domains to create this holistic understanding of community behaviors so you have the full picture so that you can make very data-driven decisions that ultimately lead to better policies, better programs, better outcomes for people.
Those kinds of connections that can be drawn are very difficult to draw if you don't have a database that unifies these. You can get all of these separate databases in separate silos, and people will sell you applications or report ways for each one of these verticals. But bringing them together so you can ask questions across those verticals is very difficult. And I think that's the very promising vision that UrbanLogiq has, to say we can take all of these, unify that data, and get a model that can ask queries about, is developing this mine going to come under any roads or maybe a school? We can figure these things out. We can't do that if we don't have all of these tied together.
You bring so much expertise. What can we expect from you as a strategic advisor?
I want to push UrbanLogiq to the right level of growth, right? I want to see the company grow to where it can support its mission and to hold the company to that mission. There's a lot of external pressure on a company like this to sell for any of the many verticals that you've become experts in. People will say, hey, you're so good at traffic analysis. We'd like to, have you become our traffic analysis arm. And, consulting companies do that all the time. I don't want to see that. I want to see UrbanLogiq be bigger than just the sum of every vertical that you're hitting, and say those together provide more value, and provide more value to all of the people who are resident in all of the towns, of all the municipalities, of all the states and provinces and countries that use this. I want that core mission to be supported, and I want to do what I can to make sure that that core mission is followed and profitable, frankly, for everyone involved in doing this work. But that core mission is so much more valuable than the individual silos, and I'm going to keep pushing on.
Absolutely. I mean, everything in a community is linked, right? You go outside and crosswalks and transportation and schools and safety, everything touches each other. So it's just really understanding the relationship in which they touch each other, and how we can make sure that our decisions are keeping in mind all of the different layers and aspects of a community.
And it's critical to understand that all of these connections, they're not just connections that we can necessarily imagine in place. Some of the machine learning models that get used to understand these are actually finding out those connections, finding out what is the latent space under those. Are there parts of the model that affect multiple layers? Can we figure that out? Well, there are some models that let us find those parts, that let us take that larger data set and find some of these vectors. That gives us another space that we can go analyze and figure out where there might be benefit.
For sure. And it's really interesting. I think now with the hype of AI, everyone's doing AI. And a lot of it is hype because, AI is not new. I mean, UrbanLogiq has been using applications of machine learning and AI since we were founded in 2016. And it was something you said to me that was interesting, where you said, we're not an AI company for the sake of AI, but we use types of AIs in order to get the best outcome.
Yeah, I think the critical piece is that UrbanLogiq is interested in using this large and growing data set to ask and answer the right questions. And AI is one of the tools in the toolbox to get there. There's a whole bunch of other very important tools. Data ingestion. Some of that is just as simple as, here's a schema that pulls this database into this database. Others are, here's a stack of traffic tickets again. We need to scan those. They're handwritten. Well, there's some OCR work, some optical character recognition, handwriting recognition. That's falling into some of the ML space, but it's so well established now that this is off-the-shelf tooling almost. But you need to use that to bring the stuff in. So you could say, yeah, that's an early ML technique, bring it into the system. But then once it's in the database, what queries do you need to do? If you can answer it with a traditional SQL query, go ahead. That's well-known, well-proven, cost-efficient technology.
Mhm.
But other parts are much harder to answer without using some other technology to gain insights out of that data and that you can pull out using these ML techniques. The appropriate thing is to use the right technology for the right query. And so this is one of the things that UrbanLogiq is really good at, is that the data platform supports all of these different ways of looking at the data, and then as well lets you grab insights from machine learning, from AI. You can use it on the back end to present the data in a better way to your users.
And getting all of that data into one place is so critical. And I think what people also don't always understand about AI is that it's not a magic switch. You're not just turning on a tap and saying, I want to do AI. It really comes down to quality of the data that you're putting in, because as we all know, garbage in is garbage out. It really starts with data governance. It really starts with understanding what data you have, what state is it in, what format is it in, is it accurate? Then kind of applying the artificial intelligence later.
For those places where AI is needed.
Yeah.
I mean, and fundamentally, I think we all know that there are some stages of AI that are very talked up right now that are expensive, right? If you go and do LLM queries, they're very expensive. Training your LLM is prohibitively expensive. Those aren't necessarily the right solution to the problems that we have at hand. And so we want to be cognizant of what the costs are of these. And even with cognizance of that cost, showing here are the best results we can get. And yeah, when we need to go there, we can go to that cost. When we don't need to go there, we can very quickly, working from the data that you've brought to the platform, and that is an ever-growing data set that UrbanLogiq manages. Out of that data, we can get the observations the government needs to make quality decisions to help their citizens, their residents, do better over time. Like you say, it's billions of dollars affecting the next 50, 100 years of a community. They deserve to have the best results possible out of that.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about one platform for government to make decisions, I think what needs to be fundamental, and it is kind of at the core of everything that we do at UrbanLogiq, is really the security aspect of it, right? We need to ensure that the data that's in our platform, governments are entrusting us with it, that it's safe and secure. So from day one, we have taken a lot of bets on that and making sure that our architecture is really where it needs to be in order to keep that data secure. The way that our CTO described it to me, very oversimplified ways, kind of our platform is built like a blockchain. So if people know what a blockchain is, it just kind of, nothing can really be erased.
Yeah, in data governance terms, it's very hard to put that kind of data governance on top of an existing platform. It can be very intrusive to figure out, to track with audit trails every change that you make to a database. So you've got, you entered some data, it turns out you caught an error in the data entry and you want to fix that. Well, you can't just go change that. There might be results that have already been generated using that flawed data. You have to be able to track those backwards in time. Who used the flawed data? Did any of the results change as we correct the data? As we correct the data, well, we've got a new record that's also set for auditing that has that tracking history. If you think of these things from day one, it's relatively straightforward to implement and to just have that be a fundamental part of your process. And UrbanLogiq's been doing that. The idea that database is a fully tracked, audited object that you can then backdate your queries in, that you can understand the evolution of. Those are critical things to have confidence in your data and confidence that you can react to changes that have happened or that need to happen to that data or that data set. Likewise, if you get a bad actor, well, you can track who's seen your data. You can track, someone changed this data. You know who, you know how. Again, doing this in retrospect is very difficult, but I know that even an administrator of the UrbanLogiq database can't change that data without leaving a trace. So that audit trail is there, and that gives us confidence that that data will be correct. and have the objective data set available for the municipalities that are using it.
Yeah, governments can always audit back and see what's happened to their data even years later. So it's definitely a benefit. I want to kind of circle back to kind of the AI piece of it. I know you mentioned, it's really about using the right type of technology. It might not even be AI to apply it to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to government, where do you think AI has the biggest potential to make a difference?
That's a big question. I actually think a lot of the technologies we're looking at have a vast potential before we even get to AI. The reduction in data silos, being able to ask broader questions, being able to be prompted sometimes to say, have you considered these other things that might be infringing or have competing interests in these same spaces? Those kinds of questions right now are important for a lot of municipal governments, just in the sense that they've never been able to ask those questions before. That a road, a civil engineer planning new roads doesn't have good optics into how the municipality is working with its with its public transit and demographics. Those are important issues, but that don't necessarily sit in his tables of what turn radius you can take as you're putting the highway down. So there's traditional techniques that are just useful to break down silos to help people execute well in their roles. Then when you get to AI, you have the opportunity to know how previously unrelated data are related. And that lets you track things like every implementation of a project seems to have side effects that you didn't know about. Well, this gives you an opportunity to find some of those side effects in advance. And that is a superpower. So that's where I'm excited, is to know that the pernicious side effects might be observed before they happen.
Kind of simulating what the impacts of decisions are going to be before making the decisions, and being able to say, maybe that's not the best course of action to take. Let's try this again.
The more often you can avoid discovering that you've made mistakes that have knock-on effects in other areas, the better off you'll be in making those decisions. And right now, governments do this. I mean, we use experts who have worked in this space, who have years of experience. And we have to keep using those experts. In doing that, we want to give them even better information and ideally give them insights on the data to help them use their experience even. Another thing that's impressed me about UrbanLogiq, I haven't caught the hubris. There's a core humility to the team on approaching this, saying, here's the things we can do with these databases, and it's all here, but there's not a we can solve every problem attitude. It's the problems we've seen, we can do this with, but there's not a hey, let's just grab all the problems right now and get through them. There's an incremental build. There's a humility that goes with that space that says we can do this in a principled way with our customers and make sure we're satisfying their needs and giving them the confidence in the solutions.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of years really just kind of focused in on traffic and transportation and kind of understanding that as kind of the base model, so to speak, right? Because as we know, transportation and mobility touches everything, right? And that's a really good first kind of layer and step to understand, and then you can kind of start to build off of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we talk about UrbanLogiq's mission, what excites you the most?
I have a deep frustration as a citizen, as a resident, as a person who is engaged in living and the effects of government, of seeing the gaps where government can't see from one department to the next.
The silos.
Yeah. It's like, we see those as citizens regularly. And, we see it in healthcare. We see it when we go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. We see these gaps on the way through. And as a systems architect, I see ways that these systems could operate better, but there's no lever for me as a citizen to just show up one day and say to the government, hey, if you connected these people to these people, well, because this is terrible. If all of us did that every time we hit two departments that weren't working together, well, now you have every department talking to every other department. No one's getting any work done. By breaking those silos down and coming to that unified database, that growing unity of vision for the decision support that we want to bring, the risk analysis we can bring, traffic analysis, bringing all of these different silos together means that you're no longer working with this order n squared interaction where everyone has to talk to everyone else. That interaction is somewhat being compressed into that model and provides those opportunities for every planner working in different places to maybe be doing better to work. As a citizen, I want to see that efficiency come to government. I want to see the promise of some things that we've been able to do in technology and other fields applied to government technology. We can do so much better. And I don't mean we just in terms of UrbanLogiq. I think that government can do so much better, but it's a high-risk endeavor that has knock-on effects in how you do business throughout government. We need to be able to do that in a principled way that takes into account data security, data privacy, that takes into account all of the different data sources that are available, and that still works well enough into every functionary's workflow. That's the piece of UrbanLogiq that's exciting, is bringing that kind of efficiency, cross-functional efficiency in.
We're starting to really see that change kind of happen in government. Not all governments, but a lot of governments do get it. And it's actually in their strategic plans where they say they want this one city or one community approach because they understand that the residents don't see the departments. Well, they just go to the city and want help with something.
It's clear that the residents, the residents of our cities, of our modern cities, are modern people. We've been learning over the last 50 years how to live with technology. And then when we come against a legacy system and go, our citizens are more sophisticated and are starting to expect more. And that means the government needs to have more sophistication and better tools to deal with it. And that's partly a staffing turnover over the years, but it's also accessibility and availability of tools. The democratization of the platforms gives that accessibility even to smaller municipalities that wouldn't have access to that otherwise.
Yeah. And another kind of piece of it too is bringing that efficiency into government as well, in not just in how they make decisions or come to the decisions, but also there's so much turnover in government. And a lot of that institutional knowledge is lost every single time somebody leaves. And catching up from that is often a huge barrier for governments and also a factor as to why they're so behind on things and processes and things like that. So also kind of another benefit of the platform that we see is capturing that institutional knowledge so that if somebody leaves, you're not caught with your pants down, so to speak, like what are we going to do? That person left. They were the ones that knew how to do it. That institutional knowledge can be captured within the platform so that service continues. So as a strategic advisor, you've already done a lot of kind of behind the scenes work with us. You bring so much industry knowledge, as an architect and kind of really understanding how these complex systems work and how they can scale. We are at a point where we are scaling, we are growing, and recruitment is a big part of that, right? Finding the right talent. I know you've been really instrumental in helping us find the right talent. You obviously know what to look out for. So what is it about UrbanLogiq that should entice a person to come work for us?
So I'm going to start with the thing we already said, like the mission is incredibly exciting. Come and be at the forefront of how governments can use data better and how we can get that data serve citizens throughout. It's probably the biggest lever right now. I see it as the biggest lever for good at the government level that I've seen in my lifetime. And I think anyone who works here really needs to understand that mission. I look at it from the technical standpoint, of course. What are the technical things that you have to be ready to work with here? And the challenge is with UrbanLogiq is that this joint database that we have that tries to put all of these different databases in the same on the same footing, so that we can query them the same way, so that we can have the AIs operate them on the same way, and to do it in a way that's very efficient. There needs to be a willingness to build that custom software, to say, here is a way to run this kind of a database efficiently and effectively. And so that means that it's a ripe space for innovation, but it's also a space where you'll be working not so much with off-the-shelf database tools, but very much with this platform representation that's growing and building and that's been architected with these constraints that don't exist necessarily in other database products. So the continuous auditing, the blockchain-like structure where the database is well annotated, well signed and understood, where geographic data sets and height fields and geotechnical data sets and demographics and roads can all tie together. That's a tall order for any database schema. And this is a core piece of UrbanLogiq technology that you have to work with. I think that's also a great opportunity, but that's absolutely a willingness that you need to dive into what amounts to a much lower level of operation than you get using, say, a Databricks platform. So that's a lot of what I'm looking for, sensibilities of engineering that say, we understand low-level performance in databases. We understand how graphics processors work so that we can apply that to the tech we have to run on. We can get the machine learning algorithms shuffled in there. So there's a huge breadth required while still having that low-level sensibility for efficiency.
Yep. And, I will say also there has to be that kind of sense of being able to communicate, because actually everybody on our team is client facing. We work so closely with our clients to develop these tools, to really understand their workflows and how they need to come to these decisions, because at the end of the day, if you give them a tool that doesn't work for how they come to decisions or their workflows, they're not going to use it. And if you don't use it, then what is the point of building it?
I would say that, early in your career, engineering is 80% writing software. By the end of your career, engineering is 90% communication.
Yep.
And it's being able to talk with every customer that you have to deal with. And this is something that if you come in as an engineer at UrbanLogiq, you're going to have to worry about, is that you will be talking to customers, and you will be talking to customers who are, from the clerk who's doing the data input to the mayor who is making choices about what directions they want to take the city. That span of roles and skills, you have to be able to talk across that whole space. You have to be able to intelligently provide value with all of these people and integrate everything they have to say into the plan that's going forward. Now, obviously, these are our level appropriate conversations on the way through, but that's kind of the growth arc, is you have to understand that the business space is critical to the work.
And yeah, as I mentioned, every single person on the team has meetings with clients and understanding their needs and translating their needs to then technology. So you really have to be very well-rounded. And, you've been helping us with the recruitment, and if anybody's listening out there and this sounds like something that would interest you and you're passionate about our mission, we are hiring. What in the short term excites you about UrbanLogiq, and what excites you in the long term?
So in the very short term, there's some interesting work going on in geotechnical analysis, where I think there's a lot of very clear benefit to be had by having the right databases aligned. Be able to say, hey, here's some roadways. We had that flooding in the Fraser Valley. Was it last summer, the summer before, last winter, the winter before?
We've had a lot of
flooding.
natural disasters
right?
Everywhere.
And being able to predict where the next one is going to hit. A lot of people are doing that kind of forecasting, but being able to say, what's the infrastructure, particularly that we need to upgrade or that we need to defend against these things? This little segment of road here doesn't look very interesting, but there's a hospital at the end of it. Maybe that's something we need to prioritize. Well, you can't wrap each of these queries up into, I just thought, actually, it turns out the gravel pit's at the other end, and if we don't have the gravel, we can't fix the roads. Those kinds of questions aren't immediately obvious as you start looking at it. And there's a lot of experts who work at figuring this out. But there's also a lot of work that can be done directly with the data we have, with traffic analysis, with construction analysis, zoning analysis, that lets you make better predictions of what infrastructure you should be protecting to get better outcomes when the disaster does happen. This kind of planning is, for me, it's very exciting. It's got the potential to help make a more robust infrastructure for our cities in the changes that we're seeing right now in the world. That, in the short term, I see a lot of excitement and a lot of good possibilities right there. Longer term, I see the bigger vision of UrbanLogiq, which is breaking down all of these silos throughout government, so that the best decisions can be made throughout. Not all of these municipalities can afford to hire SAP or IBM or large consulting firms, Deloitte, to come in and analyze what their community of 20,000 should do for their next traffic light. This is something that we should be able to help with. This vision that we can democratize these kinds of decisions by having the right databases, having the right models of how people behave, of being able to take the local data, add it to that model and say, hey, here's how your system could work, and have it done at a cost where every municipality can benefit from it instead of having to be New York or Los Angeles to get the benefit.
And that's just it. That's a huge part of our mission at UrbanLogiq, is really democratizing access to this technology, the data science, the AI, just the ability to make good decisions based on data, regardless of your tax base, regardless of your population, right? As you mentioned, you don't have to be New York or LA. You shouldn't have to be New York or LA to be able to make these decisions. Why should some little town in the middle of nowhere have less safer streets just because they don't have the tax base to afford the technology? So it's really about helping governments and public servants make decisions with data that a lot of the time they're already collecting. Governments are sitting on huge data sets, proprietary data that can really help them make these decisions. They just don't know how to use it. They don't know how to leverage it. They don't have the tools. And that is where we come in.
What's really exciting for me about UrbanLogiq right now is that the technology is at the point and scale where every new query that comes in, can we do this thing? We'd like to know how this works. Every one of those, as it gets implemented, becomes available to every other UrbanLogiq customer that way. The database grows, the techniques grow, and that democratization increases. The value of the platform increases as that happens. And as long as we can keep adding those things in a coherent way that doesn't silo off the systems, that keeps the database growing the right way, that brings all of the right inputs, we're going to be able to keep doing that. And the promise is that we can maintain this architecture to a place where everyone will benefit from someone asking the question once somewhere, hey, instead of a traffic light, should we use a traffic circle? Well, once you've got that module, you can find out, and everyone can find out.
Well, it's an example of that, a really good example of that is actually the city of Nanaimo. They're, a little community on Vancouver Island, and they're very, very innovative. And every single time they come to us with a problem and they're willing to try new things to solve it, everyone else benefits from that, right? They came to us because they didn't have traffic sensors on certain streets, right? They didn't have a full kind of understanding of their traffic volume. So we were able to kind of, with AI and machine learning, do synthetic data generation using the sensors that they already had to fill in those gaps. And now we can do that for any community, right? But it started in Nanaimo. They asked the question, we gave them an answer, and now we can bring that to every single other community that can come to us with that same problem.
And it's great because you can take that kind of synthetic data, you can do point evaluations to say, how close were we? Because you can actually lay down a traffic measure temporarily in place, use that data budget to validate the model instead of having to collect every piece of the model. And this is a huge amplification of the benefit you can get for collecting data. Say, hey, we want this extra piece just so we can validate the model's doing the right thing, or the model has the least amount of confidence in this place. If we add a sensor here, even temporarily, it's down for 3 weeks. How much do we refine the model? How much confidence do we gain in it? Yep. And getting that amplification, because data collection is expensive. Municipalities spend a lot on data collection, but being able to amplify the data collection immediately by saying, here's a small piece of data you can get that brings huge benefit to your local model and to our global model of how traffic is.
Yeah, we are now at a place with technology where we can help governments work more efficiently. That beautiful term that we would love to describe government as. But, it's still, there's still a long way to go. A government is a very, very difficult problem to tackle, but it's a worthwhile problem to tackle, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, the challenge of government is that generally government has to be conservative. We know that when you move fast, you break things. And governments, when they break things, break people's lives. Yep. And that means that governments do need to move slowly. They need to be cautious. We want to provide them the data that lets them move at a pace that's better than they do today, but still have the confidence that they've got that caution and that they've got valid data and ideally the fewest negative side effects to what they're doing.
I mean, very well said. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, you're very aligned with what we are all here for. We're all so passionate about that mission and so passionate about the potential of that mission to really do good in the world. It's, as cliche as that sounds, we really, really do want to use technology to make a difference. And I think we're on the right track.
I think so too. That's why I'm here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Paul. It was lovely to have you and chat.
A pleasure.